With less than an hour to go at Le Mans in 1988, the gearbox in the leading Jaguar broke. Jan Lammers was doing something close to 240 miles an hour down the Mulsanne straight when it happened. Behind him, on the same lap, was the Rothmans Porsche 962C of Hans Stuck, Derek Bell and Klaus Ludwig, the finest endurance drivers on earth, in a car from a company that had won this race every single year since 1981. Lammers forced the Jaguar into fourth gear and left it there. Then he made a decision that decided the race. He didn't tell the team on the radio because the radio could be heard, and if Porsche knew the Jaguar was crippled, they would come for it. So for the final hour, a British racing car with one working gear held off the most dominant team in the history of Le Mans, whilst its driver said nothing at all. They both finished on 394 laps. Both. After 24 hours and more than 3,000 miles, the Jaguar's average speed was 221.765 kilometers per hour. The Porsche's was 221.665, 1/10 of 1 kilometer per hour. That was the margin. And here is the part almost nobody knows. The chassis that won, number 488, had never finished a race in its life. Not one. It had never seen a checkered flag before, the biggest one in motorsport. If you enjoy forgotten British car stories like this, consider subscribing. There are many more coming every week. This is the story of how a Jaguar, built around a road car engine, run by a team from Oxfordshire, ended Porsche's 7-year stranglehold on Le Mans and gave Britain its first win there since 1957. And it did it whilst broken. To understand what happened in June 1988, you have to understand how long Britain had been waiting. Jaguar's relationship with Le Mans was, once, the most romantic thing in British motorsport. The C-Type won in 1951, with Peter Walker and Peter Whitehead. It won again in 1953. The D-Type won in 1955, and in 1956, and in 1957, the last of them by the Écurie Écosse cars of Ron Flockhart and Ivo Bueb. 5 wins in 7 years. And then nothing. Nothing for 1958. Nothing for the 1960s, beyond a degree of quiet factory help for privateer E-types. Nothing through the 1970s, whilst Britain's motor industry tore itself apart. Nothing through the early 1980s, as Jaguar clawed its way back from the wreckage of British Leyland under Sir John Egan. 31 years of nothing. And whilst Britain was absent, Stuttgart moved in. Porsche won Le Mans in 1981, and 1982, and 1983, 1984, 1985, 1986, and 1987. 7 consecutive victories. The 956 and the 962 didn't merely win the race, they defined what a Le Mans car was, to the point where a substantial portion of the grid each year was simply customer Porsches racing other customer Porsches. By 1987, the pattern had become almost humiliating. The Porsche 962 of Stuck, Bell and Al Holbert took the win by 20 laps. 20. The leading Jaguar finished 5th. That was the wall. Not a rival. A wall. The man who decided to run at it was called Tom Walkinshaw. Walkinshaw was a Scottish racing driver turned team owner, and his company, Tom Walkinshaw Racing, based in Oxfordshire, had already done something the British motor industry had almost forgotten was possible. TWR took the Jaguar XJS, a large and famously heavy Grand Tourer, and dominated the European Touring Car Championship with it. That result got Jaguar's attention, so the company gave TWR a job that nobody in Britain had managed for 3 decades. Build a sports racing car that can win Le Mans. It was not a small bet. Jaguar had been running its American IMSA program through Group 44 Racing under Bob Tullius, and had been running 2 separate chassis families in 2 separate championships. For 1988, all of it was consolidated. Group 44 was eased aside. TWR would take responsibility for both the Group C and IMSA programs, with 1 car. Sir John Egan, the man who had spent the early 1980s dragging Jaguar's quality out of the grave, backed it. Everything now rested on a single machine, built by a team from Oxfordshire, against a German operation with 7 straight Le Mans wins and a factory entry it had prepared specifically for this one race. The vindication came almost immediately, and from an unlikely direction. In January 1988, the Castrol liveried TWR car went to Florida and won the Daytona 24 Hours outright on its debut. But Daytona is not Le Mans. Nothing is. The car was designed by Tony Southgate, and the thing that makes it remarkable is what was inside it. The XJR-9's engine was a 7.0-litre V12, producing around 750 brake horsepower, and it was based on the production 5.3-litre V12 from the Jaguar XJS, the road car. The same basic architecture that sat under the bonnet of a Grand Tourer your neighbor could buy from a dealer in Solihull was, enlarged and developed, the thing that would take on Porsche's purpose-built racing engines. That is not how anyone else did it. Porsche's 962 ran a flat six, developed through years of dedicated competition. Jaguar went to war with a road car engine. Around it, Southgate built something genuinely modern, a carbon fiber and Kevlar monocoque, constructed in October 1987 at the Advanced Composite Technology Factory in Derbyshire. The finished car weighed under 850 kilograms. Then came the part that mattered most, and which almost nobody outside the team saw. The first three chassis, 188,000, 288, and 388, were shipped to Big Spring in Texas for a private test program Jaguar organized itself. The cars covered over 400 miles, whilst TWR hunted for the setup. That is what a serious campaign looks like, not a press release, not a promise. A team in the Texas heat, running lap after lap, looking for tenths. Britain had done this before. It had simply been so long that most people had forgotten what it looked like. The decision that actually won Le Mans was about air. Le Mans, in 1988, was still defined by the Mulsanne Straight, an uninterrupted run of nearly 4 miles where a car simply held maximum speed for the better part of a minute. The chicanes that broke it up would not arrive until 1990. To win, you had to be fast in a straight line and stable in the corners, and those two demands fight each other. Porsche's answer was the long-tail 962. Southgate's answer was the opposite. He gave the XJR-9 LM a shorter tail than the Porsche to cut drag. He used ground effects and Venturi tunnels underneath to claw the downforce back, and the balance he achieved was startling. The Jaguar generated 40% of its downforce at the front axle. The Porsches managed 25%. One of his other touches was the rear wheels, enclosed and hidden away entirely in the pursuit of slipperiness. The result of that arithmetic showed up on the Mulsanne. The Jaguar ran at close to 240 miles an hour. The Porsche managed roughly 225, 15 miles an hour, 4 miles of straight, every single lap for 24 hours. That's not a detail, that's the race. The 56th Le Mans began on the 11th of June 1988. Jaguar entered 5 XJR-9s, car number 1 for Martin Brundle and John Nielsen, number 2 for Jan Lammers, Johnny Dumfries and Andy Wallace, number 3 for John Watson, Henri Pescarolo and Raoul Boesel, numbers 21 and 22 for the American contingent. Wallace was the one nobody expected. Tom Walkinshaw's young protege from Oxford, he had never driven around Le Mans in his life until the first qualifying session, and Le Mans then contained the Mulsanne kink, a corner taken flat out at over 200 miles an hour by drivers who had learned, over years, to simply not lift. Wallace had to find that courage in a weekend. He told the press he'd been told you could overtake slower cars through the kink without lifting, and that he'd practice it when the track was clear. Lammers started car number 2 from 6th. By the end of the opening lap, he was 2nd, and then it settled into what everyone had predicted. Both Hans Stuck and John Watson, Jaguar's philosopher, as motorsport called him, had said before the start that this would be a hard contest that would go the entire distance. They were right. Through the afternoon and into the night, the Jaguar and the Porsche traded the lead. The margin, when there was one, was rarely more than a lap. Sometimes it was a handful of seconds, after 18 hours of racing. Then, in the dark, Porsche made a mistake. Klaus Ludwig had taken over from Stuck. For reasons that have never been fully explained, He stayed out one lap longer than the plan called for. The 962 ran out of fuel at the Porsche Curves. He got it back to the pits on the starter motor, but 2 laps were gone. What happened next is why Porsche were who they were. All 3 drivers embarked on a flat-out charge to recover the deficit, and they very nearly did it. Bell, more than 30 years later, still looks back on this race with frustration, the one that got away. Jaguar's night was not clean either. Brundle and Nielsen, running third and keeping the Porsche sandwiched all night, went out on Sunday morning with a blown head gasket after 306 laps. The Watson, Pescarolo and Bosel car had already retired with transmission failure. Transmission failure, remember that. Up front, Lammers, Wallace and Dumfries carried on. Lammers took the brunt of the driving. Dumfries, who had endured a difficult early season, was quick and reassuring. Wallace, the boy who'd never seen the circuit, delighted the team with a maturity nobody had any right to expect. And then, with less than an hour left, the gearbox in car number 2 broke. It was the second Jaguar to suffer it. Bosel had already retired with the same fault after 10 hours. But Bosel's failure gave Lammers something. Using his teammates' feedback, Lammers forced the car into 4th gear and left it there, knowing that he would now either finish the race in that gear or not finish at all. Then came the decision that separates a good driver from a great one. He didn't say anything, not on the radio, because radio traffic can be monitored, and the Bell, Stuck and Ludwig Porsche was by that point back on the lead lap. If Stuttgart had known that the leading Jaguar was locked in a single gear, they would have thrown everything at it. So Lammers drove the final hour of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, in a broken car, in front of the greatest endurance team in the world, and told nobody. It gets better. With 25 minutes remaining, he had to come in for a splash and dash fuel stop, which meant pulling away from a standing start. In 4th gear, a ratio geared for over 200 miles an hour, the V12, that enormous, torque-rich engine derived from a road car, simply dragged the Jaguar off the line and back out onto the circuit. The engine everyone said was the wrong choice was the only reason the car moved at all. Lammers brought it home. 394 laps, 5,332 kilometers, an average speed of 221.765 kilometers per hour, against the Porsche's 221.665. Both cars had covered the same number of laps. The gap, after a full day and night of racing, was 1/10 of 1 kilometer per hour. In the closing laps, Tom Walkinshaw arranged something. The 3 surviving Jaguars, cars 2, 22, and 21, circulated in formation and crossed the line one after the other. 4th place and 16th, escorting the winner home, cheered by an enormous crowd. When Lammers coaxed the car over the line, the spectators swept across the track. He climbed onto the roof of the XJR-9 to salute them. The Porsche of Bell, Stuck and Ludwig arrived to a crowd so dense that the 962 had to be flagged into the pit lane to complete its race there. On the balcony afterwards, the tiredness went. Sir John Egan pledged to return in 1989. Tom Walkinshaw led the singing of the national anthem, not once, but 4 separate times. And then Stuck and Bell, the men who had just lost, threw their arms around Walkinshaw, spontaneously, congratulating the team that had beaten them. That is what British motorsport looked like on the 12th of June 1988. The numbers, worked out later, were remarkable in their own right. Lammers, Dumfries and Wallace covered 40 laps more than the previous year's winners. Their distance had only ever been exceeded once in the history of the race, in 1971, by Gijs van Lennep and Helmut Marko in a Porsche 917, and that on a faster circuit without the Porsche Curves or the Dunlop chicane. They finished 3 kilometers short of the absolute record, 3 out of 5,332. Chassis 488 was retired immediately afterwards and given to the Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust, where it is still maintained in running condition and still occasionally driven at Goodwood and Le Mans by the men who won in it. Jaguar took the 1988 World Sports Prototype Championship as well, 6 wins from 11 races, the team's title, and the driver's title for Martin Brundle. They won Le Mans again in 1990 with the XJR-9, but 1988 is the one, because 1988 was the year the wall came down. For 7 years, Porsche had owned this race so completely that the rest of the grid was mostly made of Porsches, and a team from Oxfordshire, with an engine out of a road car, went to France and beat them by 1/10 of a kilometre an hour, in a car that had never finished a race in its life, with one working gear, while saying nothing on the radio in case the Germans heard. Britain still built things like that in 1988. It's worth remembering that we did. If you watched it happen, or if you've ever heard that V12 in the metal at Goodwood, leave a comment below and tell us. We read every single one. And join us in the next chapter as we uncover the rest of motoring's greatest stories. If you enjoy forgotten British car stories like this, consider subscribing. There are many more coming every week.